I actually have a top 10 list for my favorite episodes from the show. So, I have it on a piece of paper. These are my top 10 favorite episodes from Edd N Eddy. Number 10 is Hanky Panky Hullabaloo. Now, most of the times when I watch a Valentine's Day special, it doesn't really seem interesting. But Hanky Panky Hullabaloo is a pretty interesting Valentine's Day special. In this Valentine's Day special, May and Double D are hit by an arrow by two Sarah and Jimmy Cupids, and they now fall in love with each other. Rolf tries to stop them. Now, the reason why I like this so much is because I never thought that a canker would be with an Edd. So, that's what makes it so interesting. I mean, this episode was just a real treat for me, seeing an Edd with a canker. At the end of the episode, well, everyone starts falling in love with everyone, so that was, pretty funny. Yeah, Hanky Panky Hullabaloo, it's just a great Valentine's Day special. The reason I put it on number 10 is because, I don't know, it's just not good enough, maybe. Number 9, Once Upon an Edd. Now, in this episode, Johnny is trying to get some sleep, but the Edds are stuck inside his wall, and they start telling a story about it. In Edd's story, he tells a story about him owning his own jawbreaker bank, and how Kevin's like a monkey. Rolf looks pretty skinny, and has a scene in a bikini, and Jimmy is actually dressed like a baby or something. The reason I liked this episode was because of how the Edds made up their own stories. Double D's story is he owns a jawbreaker bank too, and there's a version of Jimmy without his retainer. In Edd's story, the Canker sisters eat radioactive potato salad, and they go on a big rampage. And all Double D says is blah 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 yap yap dribble dribble dribble. And Kevin says, "I'm dorkin' man," therefore Edd does not get the meaning of dork. And the stories are pretty out of control, and they're just crazy and really funny. Number 8 is Postcards from the Edds. In this episode, Johnny asks the Edds to take care of Plank's parents. That's right, Plank has parents. They're big, tall pieces of wood with faces drawn onto them. So they try to take care of them, and Eddie tries to show them a good time. But he goes crazy, and their heads fly off. Yeah, they bump into a monkey bars, and their heads go off. At the end of the episode, Johnny gets upset and makes his own pieces of wood of tough guys, and they spend the day in the tree trying to avoid them. Now, my favorite part was at the beginning where Eddie took the cul-de-sac kids into the pyramid, and Edd was dressed as a mummy. Number 7, Take This, Edd, and Shove It. In this episode, Eddie realizes that the thing people are looking for when they grow up is jobs, so he decides to have his own career day. He gives out these slips to all the kids, and they start doing their jobs. Technically, the scam is successful, and they get money for jawbreakers. However, the jawbreakers are taken by Naz, who wants to be a dentist, and she locks them up in a cage. So Double D and Eddie and Edd are trying to open it. But then Eddie gets knocked out, and when he wakes up, he's an old person. And it turns out everyone in the cul-de-sac are old. I mean, Sarah's old, Jimmy's old, Rolf's old. And there's actually a deleted scene in this one where it's revealed that the Canker sisters are married to the Edds. Now, see, this was originally going to be the finale for the whole show, but they decided to keep going on with 2 more seasons. Jesus. So, Eddie, he wakes up and he finds himself young again, but then he gets knocked out and... Oh. Now, the reason I chose this as number 7 is because, well, it really shows that it's not just a silly kids show, it's for anyone. Number 6 is Dawn of the Edds. I chose this one being the first episode of Edd N Eddy I ever saw. In this episode, Ed, Double D, and Eddie end up in a junkyard, and they start playing this game about space outlaws. But they start thinking it's all real, and they go crazy with like guns and stuff. Not real guns, it's just trash. And they like run around the whole place doing crazy things. Now, the reason I like this episode was because this is the first time they find their headquarters, and the headquarters being an abandoned van with a waterbed. That's pretty cool. I would love to get a van like that. Number 5 is All Eds Are Off. In this episode, Eddie bets all the guys, except Jimmy, to stop doing their things that they like. Eddie has to stop yelling, Double D has to stop using big words, Ed has to stop eating gravy, Rolf has to stop eating meat, Johnny has to stop talking to Plank, and Kevin has to stop saying dork. So they all go through this dare. Now, the reason I like this episode is because of how funny it is to see Eddie cheating and stuff, trying to get them all to break their dares. Of course, at the end of the episode, there's this big tub of gravy, Ed falls in, and it turns out Eddie wins. But it's not gravy, it's actually caramel. And Eddie... Caramel? No, butterscotch. And Eddie was yelling after Ed ran in, so he pretty much broke the dare. Meaning Ed was the winner, and he earned 25 quarters. So yeah, this has to be one of 2 episodes from Season 5 that I like. Number 4, they call him Mr. Ed. In this episode, Eddie starts his own business as a worker. He says they go nowhere but up. Now, I like this episode because this is what we all tried to do as a kid. We tried to be an adult, especially drinking coffee. Now, in the background, Ed is like building this big elevator, and that like gets me really laughing all the time. Number 3, Every Which Way But Ed. Now, this is another episode from Season 5 that I like. In this episode, Eddie starts telling them a flashback about how he got a jawbreaker from Johnny. But that flashback goes to when Johnny first put Plank inside this machine and Plank got a chip in his head. It also shows another flashback of when Naz was fat, and another flashback about Rolf's childhood. Then it shows a flashback where Jimmy first got his retainer, and a flashback of when the Eds were babies. I like this episode because it really shows the backstory on how the Eds met. Number 2 is 1 + 1 = Ed. In this episode, the Eds find a world where they can break the laws of reality after hearing a story from Rolf. They pull Sarah's mouth off. There's 3-headed Rolfs. They go inside Kevin's pupils and everything. And my number 1 favorite episode from the show is The Day the Ed Stood Still. In this episode, Ed dresses up as a monster, and he actually thinks he's a monster and goes on a Godzilla rampage. Now, I chose this one as number 1 because it has tons of movie references, like to Alien and Jaws.